Hey everyone, welcome to the 2Car Pros YouTube channel. My name is Ryan and today I'm going to show you exactly how to replace the front brake pads and rotors for a 2020 Toyota 4Runner. So I show you how to do one side and the other side is exactly the same, but do the sides one at a time. You don't want to get halfway through one and then go over to the other side. So if you start on one side, finish on one side before you move to the other side. With all that out of the way, let's jump in. So before we take the wheel off so we can do the brakes, we actually need to break the lug nuts loose before we jack it up into the air. In order to do that, we need to remove this center hubcap piece because you can't get a socket in there without removing that piece, and there's a special way to do that. So what we're going to do next is just grab a flat-bladed screwdriver and stick it right in here and kind of use a leverage point. I'm not going to do that right this second because I'm going to put a nice microfiber around that screwdriver. So holding on to the hub, and you have your nice terry cloth protecting the rim because you don't want to mar it. This will kind of like pop off, exposing our entire wheel, and now we can get our lug nuts loose. So now, in no particular order, we're going to grab a 21mm socket to break these lug nuts loose with a nice long breaker bar. There we go, and now we can jack the vehicle into the air so we can take the wheel off and get to the brakes. So now we can remove our lug nuts the rest of the way now that the vehicle is safely in the air. They're typically not on very tight. And what I like to do on the final one is kind of put it at the top because I want to brace the wheel with my body so it can't accidentally fall off. And then very carefully use your legs, do not use your back because it's heavy. Remove the wheel and put it somewhere safe. So now I'm in the driver's seat and I'm just having the ignition on, but the engine is not. I'm going to turn the wheel to the left. And this should expose the brakes and make them a little more workable, a little easier on us. And if you're working on the driver's side, obviously turn the wheel to the right. So now we're ready to take our brake pads out, and before we can do that, we need to retract the pistons into the calipers a little bit, and this is a 4-piston setup, so it's a little tricky. What I like to do is just grab a screwdriver, nice prying implement, and just kind of start forcing it back into the housing. And it's a little tedious and a little time consuming, but just keep at it and you will get it. Just keep nice even pressure. And since we're replacing the rotor and the pads, I don't really care about them. It's fine to mar it. I don't care. Nice even pressure, just like that. And then what we need to do is do the same thing to the other side, but what happens if you try to do the other side, it'll just push fluid to the other side of the caliper, so we kind of need to leave this in here as a chuck. So with our other screwdriver kind of acting as like a chuck, we can start prying the other side. Nice even pressure. You know, it's not about a lot of pressure, it's just an even amount. Oh yes, this is working very well until the pads have receded the caliper back into its home all the way just like this. So the next step is we need to remove this retentioning clip or a spring, whatever you want to classify it as. You don't need any tools, you just use your fingers to kind of push it through the housing like this. And then it comes off the back side of the pins, and hold on to this. Sometimes brakes come with new hardware, sometimes they don't. So it's a good idea to hold on to this funny little clip. So now we can remove these pins that hold the pad into the caliper, and they're not super hard to get out. Sometimes you just need to wiggle them a little bit. There we go. Now we can remove this spring. It'll kind of make the pads fall in on themselves. Just like that. Again, hold on to the spring. Slide our old pads out. Very slick, very trick, and very cool. So next we're going to remove this 12mm bolt, and this kind of holds the brake line bracket assembly together, and we need that to be independent of the spindle arm, so that way we can move our caliper out of the way and get the rotor out of there. So go ahead and remove that 12mm. There we go, and kind of just jiggle it off, and that should give us enough clearance when we remove the caliper assembly to get our rotor off. So now we're on the back side of the caliper, and you can see these two 19mm bolts. We gotta remove those, and those are on some serious torque, so you're gonna need a breaker bar as well, and the link is down below in the description. There we go. Once they're broken loose, we can go ahead and get them the rest of the way out. There's one. So as we remove the final bolt for the caliper, brace the caliper with your hand because there's nothing keeping it from falling off the truck. There we go. Then we can just kind of shimmy that off like this. Very cool. But do not let it hang by the brake line. You could damage it, potentially causing a brake leak, which you don't want. What you want to do is secure it to the spindle somehow with a zip tie or a bungee cord, like I'm going to do right now. So you can see, I've just zip tied the caliper in place so it's not hanging by the brake line. Always do this when you're working with brakes. Zip ties can be your little helper, and this is a great instance of that. Just make sure it's secure and it's not just going to fall on its own accord. Also, be careful of the rotor at this moment because the rotor can technically fall off right now, and they love to smash toes, so just be careful of that. So replace one of our lug nuts. You could do this at any point to ensure the rotor doesn't fall off and smash one of your toes. It's probably a good idea. I'm actually going to leave this one on as I remove the rotor. Now I have a whole video on how to remove a stuck one of these, and as you can see, this one's on there pretty good. So if you want to go see that one, the link is down below in the description and up in the card. But this rotor's kind of special. It has threaded holes to push the rotor off. I have an M8 by 125, and the link for these bolts are down below in the description. And these are really cool because they're going to just push the rotor off of the flange. 13mm socket, and just start going evenly. Like that. It's really easy. That was cool. So we can brace the rotor with our hand, making sure it's not going to fall off, removing our lug nut we had there for safety. It's always a good idea. These do weigh a fair amount. And then we can just wiggle the rotor the rest of the way off, just like that. So the next thing we're going to do is, you can see this surface rust has accumulated on this flange. Now, technically this surface rust can't be here when you're putting the new rotor on because it won't sit square. So we just take a nice wire brush and just clean the surface rust off. It doesn't have to look brand new. You just don't want it to sit kind of not completely square on the flange. So here's our nice new shiny rotor from Bosch. I've already cleaned it off using some carburetor spray and a nice clean towel. A lot of the time, rotors come with some sort of coating that's like a rust inhibitor. Sometimes they have it, sometimes they don't, so it's just a good idea to clean your rotors before you install them. And you notice I also put on a lug nut, and that's going to ensure that our rotor doesn't fall off and find one of my toes. Here's another tip. Put another one on the other side, so that way it stays square on the flange. So that way when you put the caliper on, it's a lot easier. So now I'm going to cut our caliper free, because it's time to reinstall it. And then we can position our caliper back on the spindle assembly. So we can replace one of our bolts. We're just gonna get the threads started, so that way I can let go of the caliper. And then I can put the lower one in, get that started. Yeah, it's looking really good. And then I'm gonna bring them down. That's my 19mm socket, in case you forgot. There we go, now I can grab my torque wrench. So our torque specifications for these two big bolts is 137 foot-pounds, which is quite a lot. If you have a torque wrench, perfectly understandable. Just 2-arm tight with a breaker bar would be sufficient. So what I'm gonna do, even if you don't have a torque wrench, is I'm just gonna go a little bit at a time. So I'm gonna break it up to at least 2 stages. So my torque wrench hasn't gone off yet. I'm only at like 60 foot-pounds. So now, making sure I have a good purchase on the bolt, because there's a lot of force. There we go. And then do the same thing for the top one. There we go. Nice and installed. So now we can replace our 12mm bolt that holds our brake line bracket assembly. And our torque spec for that today is 11 foot-pounds. And if you don't have a torque spec, that's perfectly understandable. Just 1 arm tight, reasonably tight, is completely fine. You don't really need a torque spec for something like this, but I have one for you anyway. Excellent. So the next thing I'm going to do is take this pad. You can notice that the wear indicator is kind of in the bottom right of the pad, and that's going to go inboard just like this. And they kind of just slide in. Oh, that's really cool. And then we just have a blank one with no wear indicator. Goes on the other side. You'll see in the kit which one goes where. There we go. Sometimes they'll fight you a little bit. It's not a lot of tolerances, not a lot of clearance there. But we can grab one of our pins that I've cleaned and I'm not going to lubricate. And I can hear some of you pounding your keyboards already about lubricating this, but you don't want lube anywhere near your brakes. So make sure that the pad is nice and lined up. And I'm just going to give it a light little tap, just a light one. That looks very nice. And line up this pad. Yeah, check that out. Sometimes a little bit of a persuasion via a rubber mallet is the right answer, and the link is located down below in the description, and we can do the same thing for the lower pin. So now we can put our replacement spring in there, and this actually came in our Bosch kit. That's why I recommend getting a nice high-end brand, because it comes with little niceties like this, and it can really make the difference in a job. You just need to orientate it correctly so it goes into its home. Like that. Looking good. Then we can grab our lower pin and slide that guy into place, making sure it doesn't disturb our spring. There we go, looks pretty good. And you can fumble with the spring a little bit if it gets a little out of whack. There we go. There we go. So our new premium kit is pretty cool because instead of that weird long spring, it just comes with two of these little like race car body clips. They're kind of neat, and I think it's a more reliable system because if one fails, you still have the other one. I like that better. So just install it like that and do the same thing for the bottom one as well. So now that our brakes are back together, we can lift with our knees and pick our wheel up. And make sure it's on the center register. And you'll notice that the lugs can actually travel inside of the wheel. So you have to line them up perfectly in order for the lug nuts to go on, because they have that little shank. They have a little shoulder there. And if you don't have it lined up, the shank won't go into the rim. And it would be really bad, like wheel falling off at speed bad. So you want to make sure that the shank goes into the hole, and then we can take our 21mm socket, I have it on an impact implement, and just run them down carefully. And go in a cross pattern. Awesome, now we can torque these to spec once the vehicle is on the ground. All right, so now we're ready to torque our wheels down. Now, if you have an aluminum wheel, the torque specification is 76 foot-pounds. If you have a steel wheel, your torque specification is 83, so a little bit higher. So I've set my torque wrench to that 76 figure because these are aluminum. 21mm socket, and we're just gonna tighten them in a star pattern. So we're always gonna go across. Always move across when you're tightening down lug nuts. That's very good. And I always double check them because this is obviously really important. You don't want these wheels just flying off. So I always double check them. It only takes you another 30 seconds and it really gives you that peace of mind. And then we can put our little hubcaps on. It doesn't matter which way as long as the cutouts match up the bolts. Just give it a couple little taps with the palm of your hand or the side of your hand like I just did until you hear that sound. And there you go. So now I'm in the driver's seat, and what we're going to do after all of our brake job is complete is we're going to come over here to the brake pedal and slowly depress it down to the end of its travel. Go as slow as you possibly can because you don't want any air getting in through seals or a different way that it's not really designed to do. Because what you're doing is taking up the space between the rotor and the brake pads because we introduced space. So just go as slow as you can. Slower the better. Until we're at the end of its travel. Now let it come back up equally as slowly. You just want to go nice and slow. And you're going to do this like probably 6 times. would be my guess. Kind of depends on how much brakes you did today. Usually on the 4th or 5th or 6th, it'll get firmer, and you'll know you're done because the pedal will get super firm, like it actually should feel like a regular brake pedal. There we go. That feels like a nice firm pedal. One more time. Yeah. Okay, now it feels like a regular brake pedal, so this car is all ready to go and brake in the brakes. And I'm going to tell you exactly how to do that. Now, before you take off anywhere, after you have brought the pedal all the way down and you have a nice firm pedal, I want you to go ahead and take it around your neighborhood and go about 10 miles an hour, not much faster than that. And go ahead and just touch the brakes a little bit and then let off. And what that's doing is introducing the new pad surface to the new rotor surface, because if you just jam on the brakes real hard, they'll glaze over and completely negate the fact that you just did a brake job. It might even be dangerous. So I would go ahead and brake in your brakes properly. Again, accelerate to 10 miles an hour, touch the brakes, let off a little bit, touch the brakes, let off again a little bit, accelerate back up to 10 miles an hour, and then do the same thing about 6 times. 6 is probably a good number for that. What that's doing is letting that dust escape away from the brake pads instead of getting re-embedded inside of the brake pads due to the new machine surfaces. It's really important to do that. You can't skip this step, or you could potentially have brakes that don't function. So that is how to replace the rotors and brake pads for a 2020 Toyota 4Runner. I'm sure a Tacoma is very, very similar, if not the same. That's kind of the neat thing about Toyotas. As far as cost went, this was like $200 in rotors and pads. The dealer wanted something like $700 or $800 for the whole thing. This was not $800 worth of work and parts. This was a lot less than that. This is totally something you could do in your driveway at home with very basic hand tools and a small amount of knowledge, which I've given you in this video. Thank you so very much for watching. If you found this video helpful or interesting at all, please consider becoming a member down below. It's a direct way to help the channel out. Otherwise, liking, subscribing, and commenting go a huge way, and I really appreciate it. Thank you again so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.